I'm sure you've heard for most of your life that love always wins. That it is love which is the most powerful of emotions. That all others pale in comparison, and that all things are possible in the light of love. I'm sad to say you were probably lied to. There is another emotion that has led to more destruction, success, and advancement than love could ever dream of. And it's one of the greatest motivators you can find in fiction. An emotion, like love, that will drive a person to destruction to satisfy it. But first, a word from this video's sponsor, me. My next book, Battle Games Book 2, is coming out on July 20th. If you would like to judge my work as I have done for so many others, here's your chance. Or if you would just like to read my science fiction sports book centered around a sport focused on melee combat, please pick it up. I've dropped the price of the first book to 99 cents, and I even have an audiobook. I'm currently working on the audiobook for the second book. I welcome all comments and critiques. Now, on with the video. Hatred. Have you ever truly hated something? That tight, burning feeling that you get in your chest, or that disgusted, guttural churning that comes with seeing an enemy succeed. Even the tiniest win is like a needle in your heart. You will change who you are to not be like them, despise others for being neutral towards them. Things they touch become tainted by them. Everything they do sickens you. If this doesn't sound familiar, congratulations, you're a very lucky individual. If it does sound familiar, welcome to the club. In my humble opinion, hatred is the most powerful motivator in human existence, just above greed. Please note, this video is not an endorsement of hatred or the actions it brings. This video is a study in understanding its motivations for use in writing and storytelling. So let's explore hatred in more detail. First, we have to define hate. Then, we'll look at it versus love. Next, we'll look at characters and historical examples, from more than 100 years ago for reasons of the ineffectiveness of a posthumous beating of the equestrian variety. Lastly, we'll talk about handling hatred and characters you're writing. Defining hate. Looking up academic papers on the subject is not something I advise trying. After passing through 8 pages of Google, a dozen on Bing, and a few on DuckDuckGo, I finally found a paper that fits our purposes. Granted, it's not an exact fit, more of a close enough. Kleinian Psychodynamics and Religious Aspects of Hate as a Defense Mechanism. That title just rolls off the tongue like a Lego sundae. I would have loved to have found something more recent, but any article I've found post-1990s reads more like propaganda than a scientific study. I wanted a paper that covered behavior, and didn't sound like it came straight from a Redditor, with a thesaurus and spell check. One of the first things it covers important to what we're doing here is hatred versus anger. This is an important distinction as they are not the same thing. Anger, as far as the paper goes, or initial anger as we call it here, is the natural reaction to a situation we would see as harmful. Think of it as someone insulting or attacking you. This type of anger, the paper assures us, is natural and happens without our consent. This is important as while anger may be an involuntary reaction, hatred requires agency. Hatred, as the paper tells us, is the cultivation of anger. Anger is used to create supporting cognitive structures that will continue to feed the individual more anger and reasons to be angry towards the object of hatred. The reason it requires agency is because a person can choose to let go of their hatred, or at least start to let go, where anger is often an involuntary reaction to stimuli, quick to rise and often quick to pass. The paper goes on to discuss the origins of hatred in infancy. Sparing you the long, droning psychobabble, hatred is first cultivated due to the clash between the life instinct and the death instinct. Or to dumb it down further, that which we need to live and makes us satisfied versus that which denies us with its indifference and absence. I'm not sure this is true, but it sounds nice. One thing I can agree on is hatred is the source of other emotions, the big three being greed, jealousy, and envy. Understand that jealousy and envy are not the same thing. Jealousy is wanting something other people have. Envy is the desire to destroy something because someone else has it. The paper postulates, and I agree, that envy is the most responsible for the negative reactions associated with hate. Biblically, this is known as being covetous. To give a simpler explanation for our purposes, and somewhat to quote the paper, hatred is a complex aggressive effect whose primary aim is to destroy its object. In other words, hatred exists to compel you to destroy the object of your hatred. According to the paper, this changes when the hatred is strong enough. It forms a paradoxical existence where the hatred needs to destroy the object and yet needs to keep it around so the hatred is not lost. This sounds contradictory, or like a government program, and with good reason. So what does this conflicting nature lead to? Well, torture. Hatred at this level takes joy in the suffering, just as much as it fears changing places with the object. It wants the object to suffer but doesn't want to end it. It wants to maintain the relationship. In other words, maintain the reason for its existence. It is stated in the paper that hatred is a choice, but this doesn't mean a person suffering from hatred can simply drop the feeling and go about their day. A person can make the choice to begin to let go, to heal the split in the separated identities of the object they hate. The article states to hate something, a split must occur between everything seen as good in the object and everything seen as bad in the object. The good will be ignored, and the bad will become the sole focus. It is also stated that in extreme cases of hatred, subjects develop a sort of tunnel vision. Their cognitive abilities are actually impaired when dealing with the object of their hate. We've seen this in movies where a villain ends up destroying themselves in pursuit of the hero. There are many reasons why a person may hate, but the most interesting I found in the paper was that hate can be a defense mechanism. This is the primary focus of the paper. Hatred can shield a person from emotional pain, the challenges of life, reality, the loss of a relationship, and even themselves. It's a way for people to cope with things they either can't have, can't control, or can't process. An example in the 48 Rules of Power is to hold in contempt that which you cannot have. That's if I'm remembering the book correctly. This may be a rule to prevent a person from destroying themselves with longing, but I'm getting off track. This brings us to our last bit in defining hate, and that is why people choose it. The reason is, in a weird way, pleasure. It can feel good to hate. It can make a person feel powerful and in control of a negative situation. It helps a person seek vengeance and deal with the horrible things that go along with it. Life is hard, especially so when you have a morality of right and wrong. Hatred can help a person break through the logic of their morality. It can give justification to your feelings towards another person, especially a person who has done you wrong or appears to be wrong. Moving on to motivations. We often see love and hate contrasted against each other. I've heard it said that love and hate aren't actually opposites, that the true opposite of love is indifference. This is usually justified by love being an abundance of feeling and indifference being its absence. I'm going to paraphrase Terry Pratchett here. Indifference is not the opposite of love, merely its absence. Hate is what you get when you start at love, pass through indifference, and come out the other side. By this I will say, yes, hate is the opposite of love. Such as if love is a 10, indifference is a 0, and hatred is a negative 10. So let's compare these opposing emotions. We'll start with maintenance, because what fuels these two is completely different. I'm going to provide a quick definition of love. We're not talking about love at first sight, kindly known as attraction, or unkindly known as lust. We're talking about a deep caring for someone, brought about by extended bonding time in their company. This usually involves affectionate feelings, familiarity, and trust. Love, in this sense, requires a number of things: time in each other's company, positive reinforcement, a level of trust and expectation, affirmation of the other person. All of this takes time and must be built up and reinforced with interaction. Real love is work. Hate is a different beast. Once it gets started, it will look for anything to fuel itself. It will scrutinize every action of the object of hate, looking for confirmation of its biases. It needs no time in the object's presence. It needs no outside reinforcement. If you're around the object of your hatred will use that. If the object is not around, great, it can use that too. It will pull everything it needs from common inoffensive actions if it must, but it will fuel itself. People say you fall in love, but that's not entirely accurate. It would be more accurate to say you slowly descend into love. With rare exception, love has to be built over a really long time and needs reinforcement. Hate can happen in a matter of seconds. It barges into the room and screams in your face. It's the annoying kid on the airplane kicking the back of your chair humming some random song, ignoring the pleas from its mother, and laughing at your annoyance. With hate, simple words can drive an otherwise completely rational person into a demented screecher. If there was ever an emotion a person could fall into, it's hate. Love can lead a person to sacrifice. People will give up time, money, and labor for those they love. Love involves caring, a certain degree of dedication and attention, a trust that what a person loses is worth it if it helps the object of their love. Hate will lead a person to destroy themselves and smile about it. Love can lead to great moments of unknown strength. Hate can lead to unfathomable pettiness. A person in love can waste away pining. Hatred can do that too, while the hater tears down the world around them. You work to fall in love, but falling out takes indifference. Hate hits in seconds and takes constant, stubborn work to get out of. Long story short, love feels good but requires effort. Hate also feels good and will do all the work for you. In terms of ease of use, if not preservation and productivity, hate wins. So let's get into some fiction and history. There's only one fictional story we need to look at to understand hatred: The Count of Monte Cristo. This is one of those books I want to tackle but haven't found the necessary running start. This is because it's king of the doorstops. This book, in its unabridged form, could kill an Australian spider with a 1-inch drop. So I'm going to do my best to summarize a really, really long story to the best of my memory. Sailor on a boat is framed by his shipmate, his fiance's cousin, and a judge friend and sent to jail for almost 20 years. He escapes, gets rich, and returns to France to seek vengeance. He drives one man to suicide, another to insanity, and the last to imprisonment and bankruptcy. There is so much more to this story, and one day, maybe, I'll do it justice. You've probably run across the general plot in a dozen other stories, but it's a tale of revenge. Revenge, no matter how cold, is a product of hate. Yes, the main character is righting the wrongs done to him, but the route he's chosen is not one of justice. What he does is psychological abuse and vengeance. He doesn't physically end these men for ruining his life. He plays with them, ruins them, and leaves them alive for his enjoyment and vindication. In other words, torture. At least until the end where he lets one go because he felt guilty. Moving on to real people. We're going to look at some historical figures famous for their hatred before the 20th century. I'm sure I don't need to explain why. Also, some of the historical claims may be sensationalized and not representative of what actually happened and blah 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 blah. General disclaimer here. First and most obvious would be Vlad Tepes, or Vlad the Impaler. Now I know some people really like old Vlad. He's a hero to Christendom in Europe, a major historical figure, and a role model to folks in his area of the world. Some of the things he did, though... So to lightly cover it in YouTube-friendly terms, Vlad and his brother were taken to be raised in the Ottoman Empire, and some really unfortunate stuff may have happened to our young impressionable impaler. I'm not going to mention it here, but it's the kind of stuff that makes prison life short, brutal, and full of sharpened toothbrushes. When Vlad returned and took his crown, he was a changed man. To show how changed he was, when the Ottoman diplomats refused to remove their turbans in his presence, he had them nailed to their heads. If you've never seen a medieval nail, imagine a piece of pizza cut in half and made of iron. This isn't the nails we know today. This is a rough black iron wedge. Vlad later would go on to make forests of his enemies and friends he saw as enemies. Really, really grisly forests. That included children. His brutality was so complete it impressed the Sultan of the invading Ottomans. I only have passing knowledge of the Ottomans, but I know them to be a brutal folk. And impressing them with a display of brutality is a bit like impressing Satan with your debauchery. Moving on to our next historical figure, we have Saint Olga of Kiev. After some very stupid people killed her husband, they dispatched an envoy to propose marrying her to their leader. She proceeded to bury the envoys alive. Then she had a bonfire that included some of their governors. Probably the scariest thing she did was siege a city. The price of freedom was birds from each family. That night, when the city was celebrating paying her off and finally being free of the siege, she had flaming sulfur tied to the birds and released them back into the city, where they flew back to their nests, on or near the thatch and wood houses. Middle Ages fire codes weren't a thing. Oh, Saint Olga, the original sister of battle, purging the traitors with fire. Again, we have a story of vengeance. It would be hard to contest this was not done out of hatred. Saint Olga could have had her vengeance without turning a city into a bonfire, or the governors, or burying people alive. In her case, her hatred led her to canonization in the Catholic faith. Lastly, a fun example. Andrew Jackson was a man of many prejudices. One of his most famous was with the Second Bank of the United States. There was good reason to hate it. It was corrupt, benefited foreign interests, and propped up his political rivals. Jackson made destroying the bank a major pillar of his presidential candidacy and later his presidency. He took the money that would have gone to the bank and dispensed it to lesser rivals. There is an argument that this led to massive inflation and the near total destruction of the economy. There are rumors that on his deathbed, Jackson's last words were, "I killed the bank." Hatred doesn't have to be people-centric, and in this case, it wasn't. Jackson is credited with a few other examples of hatred that I can't really cover, this being YouTube, so we'll move on. So how can we use what we've gone over to make a hateful character, or just to make our character's prejudices more realistic? First step is to determine the object of a character's hatred. This is important because it establishes the root, that from which the rest of their hate spreads. This doesn't have to be another person. Hatred can be transferred from one object to another by something as small as indifference. If you don't sufficiently hate the same object, you are now a candidate for transference. Yes, hatred can end up as an endless purity spiral. Your object should have a relationship with the character who hates it, even if the relationship is one-sided. It can be a very thin connection, but for proper hate there needs to be a relationship of some kind. This can be anything from a spurned lover to a person passed on the street every day that your character creates elaborate grievances about, to someone who did them actual harm. Even an oppressive ruling body can be an object of hatred for a character. While the governing body barely knows the character exists, there is a relationship in the constant abuse of bureaucracy, oppressive laws, or violent authorities. Another important aspect to hate is how powerful it is. Is this just a casual, I hate working with this person and wish they didn't work here? Or is it more of a, I will end your bloodline and scrub your name from history sort of hate? Determining the level of hatred is important as it will establish how your character will react to the object of their hate. A lesser level of hatred may bring nothing more than passing over the object for promotion, scoring petty victories against the object, or even just stealing things from their desk and laughing about them, looking for them for hours on end. At greater levels, you should start to see cognitive impairment and tunnel vision, at least in regards to the object. There should be a disregard for logic, surroundings, and harm the actions are doing to the character. They could be skipping meals as they plot what horrible things they're going to do to the object of their hate. Setting up machinations is costing them sleep, money, and connections. It should feel like an obsession as the character deteriorates and actively destroys everything they've built for petty victories and grand schemes. At this level, the character should have abandoned wishing to destroy the object. They will want to capture it, restrain it, and make it suffer forever, but should be terrified to lose it, and even more scared of being on the receiving end of what they plan to do or are actively doing. At all levels, the character should take at least some joy in the suffering, maybe even comfort. The hate is reassuring. It's the rock they have planted their psychological flag on. Hate is not an easy thing to get rid of. It's not something you can talk a person out of. Looking back at the paper we talked about earlier, convincing a person to let go of their hate normally has to be done during or after a period of depression. It's not something you can do when someone is in the throes of rage and hate. You will never rhetorically or logically talk someone out of their hatred. Hate is, by its nature, irrational. It has already split the object of its hatred into good and bad portions, the good parts conveniently left out of all consideration. If your character lets go of their hate, it should be painful. Losing hatred is losing a relationship, one the character invested a lot of effort in. A good example comes from Avatar: The Last Airbender, where Prince Zuko gives up his search and hatred for the Avatar. It physically sickens him. He collapses and can't carry on. He's not only lost a portion of his identity, he's lost a major relationship between himself and what he thought the Avatar was. There's even the issue that the Avatar was not the initial object of his hatred, but something that it was transferred onto. This isn't a relationship built on love, but an emotion just as strong, if not stronger. There is longing, wishes, desires, dreams, and so much time tangled into the identity hate has made. Hatred can be so all-consuming it becomes a person's whole life, and getting rid of it destroys that person. To bring it to something short, sweet, and to the point, losing one's hatred should be treated as just that, a loss, like a death or a loss of a career. Hatred is a big emotion and leaves an equally big hole when it leaves. But what if your character doesn't lose their hatred? What if they succeed? What if they accomplish their goal and now have the object of their hatred under their power? Or at least they think they do. Here is where you can get a bit sadistic in your story. Have the character celebrate the pettiest of victories. Show them engaging in their depravity with no regard or empathy for the object. Remember, this is something that gives the character pleasure. The object of their hate is just that, an object. The character has long ago stopped considering it a person, if it ever was. All things are justified because 1. Everything is the object's fault, and 2. It's just an object and doesn't matter. And yes, I know that's a contradictory statement. Hate is not a rational emotion. It doesn't need logic to fuel itself. So it makes sense for hateful characters to be irrational in their hatred. You also don't need to diminish the character's faculties, but it may help to show their pain if an object scores a victory. So what can we take from all this? First of all, hate is a powerful emotion. Some will argue love is more powerful. I would argue that hate is more powerful simply because love is more likely to shift to hate than the other way around. Hate definitely has an advantage in perpetuating itself. In this case, it falls to the author and the story they wish to tell as to whether love or hate is stronger. We've seen some examples of hatred through history and fiction. There are still arguments over whether this was real hate or not, if the individuals were acting out of hatred or some other notion like love, pride, or honor. We've also touched on ways to approach hateful characters. The hate is petty, spiteful, and can drive a man to terrible things. It's important to note that while I claim that hate is a more powerful emotion than love, I'm not saying it's a better emotion. As we've established, hate is destructive, often as much to the character as to the object of the hate. Love will make a person ignore imperfections, forgive indiscretions, and work towards a positive end. Or at least a perceived positive end. Hate will tear down the world to destroy its focus. Hate needs no validation or even signs that things are improving. It's singular in its existence, and that existence is to cause suffering. In my personal life, I'd choose love every time. It's preferable to be loved than hated. Love is a cultivated thing you can watch grow. In my literary life, I find hate to be more fun. Good luck, everyone.